Hi, I'm Mark Thompson. I'm with Mark Mclaughlin, and I'm just delighted to have this opportunity to talk through some of the incredible issues and the opportunities that are happening with boards and chief executives in the C-suite for the Stanford CEO Summit. And Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to beam yourself in. This is the way we seem to be convening, and I appreciate you coming along and giving us your insights today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark, for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to having a sense now of how, as you look reflecting over the pandemic and how it's affected the organizations that you've observed, both the customers as well as the boards that you sit on, what would you say are some of the lessons that have been gleaned from the process of having to do, the emergency meetings and then gravitating to changing workforce and then looking for, quite frankly, what you've done in redefining the new normal? What do you wish you knew at the beginning that you know now, and what do you think some of the takeaways should be for other board members?
Well, I think, on the business side, I'm not sure anybody would have called what was actually going to happen for certain segments of technology to have really robust results as a result of COVID. A terrible thing, but good outcomes for some businesses that are benefiting from exactly this, right? The ability to work remotely. Surprises, I think, would fall in a category of massive increases in productivity. I think everybody assumed productivity was going to go off a cliff, with nobody being physically together. In all the instances I'm associated with, productivity is soaring, almost to a fault. I think people are working too much. I think they're working too hard. They don't take any breaks during the day. It's very easy to, get on a video call, and use all that time that people would consider wasted before about getting on planes and getting your car and just even going to the office, right? So I'd say one thing, though, that's kind of interesting, a debate that's going on is, what happens next, right? And I think I think it would be wise to not call the ball yet, to go too far down the path as to, everything's changed, in some massive way. Because I think coming into the pandemic, most people had no idea how it was going to turn out, as far as productivity and work goes. And it's been better in a lot of cases, at least in technology, than we thought. And, I hear a lot of discussion. We spend time talking about maybe you don't need offices anymore, right? And everybody can just work like this. Personally, I don't think that's going to happen. I think one of the things that I hear again and again, just as when we got on the call here, we unfortunately haven't seen each other in person in a while and much prefer to do it that way, right? And I think everybody has this innate desire for to be connected, physically connected with folks. So I think we're heading into some, maybe closer to what it used to be than we think, but minimally a hybrid, right? That with a lot of physical interaction, I think people are craving that.
When you think about the evolution of how people have been adjusting to the remote work idea, that has really been true for 20 years. I think for me, one of the surprises about having, let's say, Zoom come along after other forms of video conferencing was that we'd had video conferencing for a long time. We'd had remote meetings where we had to convene across 5 geographies. We'd had workforces and supply chains that were globally distributed, and yet there was nothing like everyone who used to be in the room no longer to be in the room. Everyone had, I guess, in a sense, it was a bit democratizing in that way. Yeah. So do you see a hybrid kind of emerging from here, or what do you? How would you distinguish?
Yeah, I think there'll be a hybrid, and again, I think maybe closer to what it used to be than what we're experiencing today, and I think some of that will break down by age groups as well. So for a wonderful example is my daughter. She's 25 years old. She actually works at Zoom. She's never met anybody in person ever, at the company since she's been hired. She was hired virtually. She's been working virtually, and she's never met one single person in person. And, if you ask her, and lots of people in that age bracket, what's the number one thing you want to do? She wants to go to the office. She actually wants to meet people that she's been interacting with for, for months and months and months now, right? And I think folks who had the opportunity pre-pandemic to work together and establish those relationships at a very personal level it's not hard, to get on a Zoom call and discuss things, and you already felt the trust, you know each other. So I think some of it's just going to break down into age, and then also how long have you actually been with an organization? Have you had the opportunity to build personal relationships on trust with people over time?
The fact that you've had a chance to now think about what the dynamics are between the CEO and the chairman in terms of the communication flow and the episodic nature of showing up as board members, and you get the board pack. Could you talk a little bit about how the level of engagement of the board should be with the chief executive and then maybe other members of the team as you think about that?
So sure. Let me start with that in this COVID environment, which we've onboarded 3 new board members at Qualcomm, and nobody's ever met them in person. That makes them great board members still, right? But I think back to the question we were just talking about. The top of the list for those board members and for the rest of the board is to meet each other, right? And maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I think there's always going to be a place for personal relationships and getting to know folks. And I think in the boardroom today, in this pandemic environment, one of the big things that's missing, that's a real problem, is particularly if you have board members who are very geographically remote, right? Is a lot of happens at board meetings in the hallway and over dinner, and including with the team, right? So this is a segue into your question, which is, for the boards that I'm on, when I've been the CEO, I've highly encouraged my board to interact with my team. They don't need to ask me to do that. Go ahead and do that. If you have enough confidence to do that, then you should just let them talk to them. And in facilitating those, one of the ways to do that is at the meetings themselves. Always have the team in the room. I would usually have my full management team in most of the board meeting, because then they don't leave and wonder, what did the board say, right? You heard it, right? They're not in the closed sessions and the executive sessions, but they heard it themselves. And then also the opportunity to bring in, star performers or people on succession pass for cocktail hour and dinners. That's a great way to get the board to meet folks. I think one of the mistakes that gets made is, by CEOs, including myself, early on, was just assuming the board knows a lot more than they know. You're so close to the paper as the CEO that you just think everybody has even some level of understanding that you do, and that's just not true at all. So you have a very, very compressed time frame to get across only the most important things to the board. Hopefully, you've taken the time to build trust with them on a personal level, where in person helps a lot. And hopefully that you're taking time between the meetings to speak with them. That's your job, not theirs. For the CEO's job to reach out to the board and build those relationships. And then ideally, you're taking every opportunity you can to have the board actually see people other than you, which is your management team and the up and comers. And there's lots of ways to create those opportunities. It's better physically, of course, right? When we get back to that environment. But I would say that's the job of the CEO. On the flip side, for the board, the board's number one job, I think, right, is to hire and fire the CEO. Like, there's a lot more. There's governance, there's all sorts of stuff, but that's the number one job. And there's a lot that gets baked into that, right? Which is not only just the CEO, but do you have a constant succession planning concept going on all the time, right? Not just for the CEO, but at least CEO -1, right? Maybe -2. But always starting with the CEO. And that's really hard. I think everybody talks about it. Everybody does their exercises, but it's very, very difficult in practical terms for the board to do that, partially because they just don't know people, inside the organization. So that was a long-winded way to say it. Take every opportunity and advantage as a CEO to have the board actually speak with your management team, interact with them, and hopefully many times without you involved, so that you don't feel like you're managing all the situations or there's only one right answer, whatever your answer is to those things.
One of the disciplines that you brought to your role as a CEO and also to Qualcomm is that many of the technical organizations that you and I have worked with for our careers, we're very much focused on technological innovation, as well as business and operating delivery for customers, and not so much on this leadership development that you're describing that also comes from that interaction between a board and the skip level, the C-suite, and the team. And you've brought a coaching culture, in a sense, to the role of a CEO, which is around collaboration, in addition to making the big decisions. Could you talk a little bit about feeling comfortable with that coaching process, especially as we as technical people may not have been raised with that as a framework like a professional athlete might have been, or people from other disciplines?
Yeah, I would say, very importantly for whether you're CEO or board members, but this is where I think a board can hopefully be helpful, right, would be to help organizations rise above whatever they think their capabilities are. Like that's what a good leader is going to do, is going to see where you are and then, appropriately challenge you and help you get to the next level, and then congratulate you for that, and then challenge you to go to the next level, right? And you need to do that with the entire, organization, to not let them rest on their laurels, but always, move them up, move them up, move them up. And one of the ways I think you can do that, it's really important, is to reject what I call the either or mentality. And you find this a lot, I think, in technology companies, particularly ones that are very R&D focused, where the whole key to success for the organization is the tech, right? Like, and there's some really, really hard tech problems in the world. So you have to be extraordinarily careful to overweight that in your decisioning process, and make sure the very best from an engineering perspective, and in a room where everybody's equal, there are people's views who are more than equal, right? Usually coming out of the R&D side, without that feeling like other people are second-class citizens if they're not, in those organizations. And so this either or rejection would be to say, hey, look, it's increasingly difficult to be a successful CEO in the world today, especially for public companies. There's a whole lot of things on your plate that that weren't there before 20 years ago. And to say, we can be the best, and we will be the best at the following things, everything, bang, 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 and go down the list, starting with the technology, but not say, hey, we can only do that. If we do that, then we can't be the best at, pick whatever the next thing on the list is. And really get the team effort to say, everything's important here. Every time we're the best in the world at human resources or talent development or succession planning or diversity inclusion, and get on the list, when we're the best in the world at that, those are real competitive advantages, for a company. Shouldn't rely on just one competitive advantage. Everybody's got to be, world class here. And then everybody appreciate that. Like, we're all bringing something to the table, and some folks aren't more important than other folks in the success of the company. So that mentality is really important to drive through, and that's going to come from the CEO. The board can only do so much there, but the board's job, I think, and that is to continually challenge a CEO, step, keep moving up. Right.
It's a profound point, and I think that culture of continuous self improvement that goes along with technology improvement, having those align. It's in a sense thinking like an engineer about that next wave, but also doing that in terms of the leadership team ends up being critical. At Stanford, I was able to have a little bit of time as a graduate student with Jim Collins when he was writing Good to Great and Success and Built to Last. Wrote the sequel, Success Built to Last, and he was talking about this genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or that you're describing, which is it makes so much sense, because we've worked so hard to de-risk the organization and grow the technology, and yet we don't want to have that become complacency, or feel like we're certainly inserting some risk whenever we try to innovate. How have you helped people kind of feel comfortable with that? Because success doesn't usually breed future success if we don't feel safe to continue to push the envelope.
I'm not a big business book reader, as but I've read the ones that are really good, and I put Jim's right at the top of the list, and yours as well, and I think that's the problem, right? And if you go all the way back to Christensen and the Innovator's Dilemma, like, these are all related concepts and theories about how do you move forward all the time, right? And whether it's Jeff Bezos with day one, or whatever the mentality is in the company, is to always drive that mentality to say, we should be very happy and proud about our success and what we're doing in the world. But there's a very fine line between pride and arrogance, right? And lethargy, right? And that's something I tell people all the time, to say, it's good to be proud, it's bad to be arrogant. Pride means that you've left everything on the field, regardless of the results, right? And if the results are very positive, then you should be very happy and fulfilled that you were part of creating that success. But that success means nothing about the next level of success. That's arrogance, right? And it's really difficult to walk that fine line where you want people to be very proud of their work, but not fall into arrogance and lethargy, right? And then that creates the whole innovator's dilemma as well, which is, the more successful you are, the more you're tied into that success, partially mentally and a lot financially. And that's what really, really kills companies, is you delivered one great thing. Usually companies delivers one great thing, and now they need to get, act 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how many companies are actually able to go through acts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6? There's just not a lot of them, right? Where they're able to take, act 1 and use the profits and fund act 2 and act 3 and act 4 and reinvent themselves. And those are the ones we always look to and hold up as wildly successful, but that's their secret.
It is. It is. And it sounds like you've done that over and over again. I've certainly observed it in the work that you did at Palo Alto Networks. You've been bringing some of that continued sensibility to your role as board member and as a chief executive. And I'm just grateful that we could, take a few minutes today to have you share that insight, because it really unlocks the capacity for people to be able to contribute at their next level. What do you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you know today about some of these principles, especially when it comes to leading people and the equation there of being able to have them feel as encouraged about their capacity to differentiate between pride and arrogance?
Boy, I'd say there's so many things that I wish I knew. Probably the answer to the question would be, I wish I knew the things I didn't know, right? And or the assumptions about things that I thought that I knew, and learn the hard way. And I'm going to use a term that's maybe overused today, but I mean this very specific way, which would be like the empathy, for other folks. And I'll give you just a quick snapshot of that. When I first became a CEO the very first time, I had been running a very good part of the business prior to that. I was the president and COO, and I was like, how much harder can it be, to be the CEO? I've been doing pretty much everything, right? And I learned the difference very quickly. When you're the CEO, that the buck truly stops with you. You better be very careful about everything you say and do. Everybody's watching. They're looking for behavior modeling in ways that they do for the rest of the leaders in the organization, but it's very distinct, for the CEO. And all of a sudden, you're in charge of the relationship with the board and the investors and the key customers, and you just keep going down this list. And it taught me, empathy, right? To say, hey, there's a very long list of priorities here. We're not going to be able to get them all right, and we need to balance them, right? So, I started to become very empathetic with people's viewpoints, to say, this is important to me. And say, okay, well, we got to balance that with these 15 other things over here. And, let's do that as a team. It goes back to the team building concept of, is everybody aware of what everybody else is doing? That's just, there's different leadership styles, but that was mine, which was to make sure that everybody on the executive team was very aware of what was the most important thing for everybody else in the executive team, right? Because then it's not just not my problem, right? To say, how do I prioritize these from a resource allocation perspective? Everybody can be empathetic with each other. Like, okay, you're right. That's a serious issue. I need to give up a little bit over here in order to help you do that. And later on, you can help me. And, and that just makes work fun then too, when you have that kind of culture.
It does. It does. When you've done that throughout your career, the surprise, I imagine, has been that you need to be able to engage other people and bring those decision rights as close to those executives as possible. Was that one of the surprises for you in the early days of being a CEO? You go from empathy and then you realize, well, I can't make all the decisions and I shouldn't be.
and this might be a West Point thing I learned, but there's some sayings, adages that actually have enormously deep meaning in them, but they just sound like words, until you live them. But and one of those was, Colin Powell has, famously said in a bunch of leadership principles, which are he's very good at that, right? And they're easy to understand. But one was the commander in the field knows more than the general in the headquarters about what's actually happening. Now, the general's got to work the strategy and all the prioritization of the resources, but for the decisions that need to be made in certain areas, you'd be very wise to defer to the commander on the spot, as opposed to trying to make sure that you're synthesizing everything and trying to make these decisions back at headquarters all the time, because you're probably going to be wrong, and you're definitely going to be slow if you do that. So delegating and pushing out to the edge as much as you can, decision making process, I think, is important. But you can only do that when everybody has some common understanding of what the entire situation looks like. So that takes time to do that. It's consensus building and time to make sure everybody's aware of things. And then that points directly to the culture of the organization. And as I spent a lot of time on values and culture, but the whole reason for that was to say, hey, there are certain things here in this company that we call our values. And the only really important thing about them is, if you need to make a decision, if you're somehow you ended up on a deserted island and there's just you, and you need to make a decision about something in this company, whether it's a customer or how we treat each other or something like that, and you make that decision in accordance with the values, you can't ask anybody. Nobody's going to give you direction. You'll never be wrong. You may have made a bad business decision, which we'll fix later on, but you will not be wrong as a matter of culture and values in the company. And if everybody shares that sense of what those things are, really, not just says, but really does that, and they have some sense of what's happening from a prioritization perspective in the company, you got a pretty good shot of people at the edges making decisions, good decisions, and they're definitely going to make them faster than you're going to make them if you have to wait, to be the big hub, right, and get all the information and dictate things from top. There's different styles. That was my style, but that one seemed to work.
It ends up being one that allows scale to happen. This ends up being, we work so hard to try to get scale for organizations, and then they don't end up scaling any faster than the leaders themselves, the commanders and the generals. The individuals are able to scale, and that's something that's been a hallmark, I guess, of what you've developed and carried from your earlier part of your life onto the field of business for the long term.
Yeah, I would always talk about scale and velocity. I think that people, if you're only talking about scaling, you're missing half of the equation, and the half that's going to kill you or make you successful. And I used to do this diagram all the time of scale, right, and velocity. And whatever the problem is you're trying to solve for, usually I used it in recruiting. It would be to say, hey, if I went out to a recruiting agency and said, I need a new CFO, and we're doing $500 million in revenue, and I need somebody who has seen $1 billion, twice our scale, and I'd get, I don't know, 40 resumes, right? All very qualified people who've operated at $1 billion at scale. But if I said, okay, now we're at 500 million and we're going to $1 billion, and we're going to do that organically, and we're going to do it in 19 months, literally, something like that. You throw that velocity curve on there, and then the problem set becomes very specific. And then you say, well, there's only 2 people who have ever done that. Right? Well, give me their cell phone numbers, right? It's super focusing to be able to do that, to have the scale concept and the velocity concept in all your decision making.
Well, this has been one of the most inspiring things about your work, is that you've been able to do scale at speed, and that velocity ends up being such a game changer. And I would love to be able to invite you back for the next chapter of our Stanford CEO series, because that's exactly where we're going to be heading next. We're talking about scale. Now we're going to talk about speed and slope. And you've just given the greatest tease to that next part of the equation. So I'm grateful to you, and thank you for your mentorship. Thanks for your leadership and the work that you do, and the character that you bring to it, because that sense of empathy that you have, not only for the people on the team, also for the people that you're working with, is part of your hallmark. So congratulations.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. I've been super, super fortunate to work with great folks. I'm great. solutions to important problems. So I'm just part of the team. It's been wonderful to go along for that ride.
Well, they love working with you. So thanks so much. And and in the great tradition of paying it forward, no good deed will go unpunished. We'll be asking you back to continue to help kind of the next generation of people who are coming to this cause get better at what they do. So thank you for that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
Take care. Great talking to you.
Okay.